Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to Divulgence and happy holidays. I hope everyone is enjoying their holiday season. Today, I am bringing back technologist and founder of Funk Coffee, Kurtis Warren. And I'm also bringing on author and Forbes contributor, Roger Huang. Gentlemen, how are you guys doing today? Happy holidays. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, doing great. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, Jordan. Hope you've been enjoying the season.
It's going well. It's going really well. Like I said, I've been enjoying my eggnog, my and spiced rum, little spiced rum, and some Christmas jazz, and the classic Christmas movies, and trying to soak up all the joyous stuff about the holiday, right? I'm not really religious, but I like the fun little rituals that are involved. So, how about you guys? You guys been having a good holidays?
Yeah, catching up with friends, having a really good time, and I've just been coming back after some travel, so it's good to be around home again.
Nice. How about you, Curtis?
Yeah, I mean, I had a really nice Christmas dinner. I think we did it on Christmas Eve, and brought my guitar. We had little jam sesh with my uncle,
Hey.
my cousins, and it's the band only plays together once a year, so we're a little bit
Ah,
this, but we
love
made
it.
it through it, and yeah, it's super nice.
Once a year, but it's always a sellout show, right?
Yeah, totally.
Awesome.
We
Awesome.
forced them to listen to us. So
That's great. I love it, man. Well, thank you guys for being here. Why don't we take turns you introducing yourselves to the audience real quick? Curtis, why don't you go first, my friend?
yeah, thanks, Jordan. Second time on the pod. Super happy to be back. My main thing is I operate a business called Funk Coffee, and we are a coffee roastery. We do e-commerce and subscription boxes online. We got a cafe here in Vancouver, looking to expand the business. And one cool fun fact about the coffee bar is that it's become kind of the Bitcoin community hub of the city, which is great because we host meetups there, and lots of events. We sell Bitcoin at the cafe. We sell books at the cafe. Occasionally, we have special guests like Roger and the mayor of Vancouver come by and give talks. So yeah, it's been fun.
That's so cool. I like I learned that last time you were on, and yeah, that's so awesome. I love what you're doing. It's great. How about you, Roger?
Yeah, let me also take a moment first to shill Funk Coffee Bar. Great coffee. I don't drink coffee, but it's great coffee.
Nice.
No, it's a great spot though, and Curtis is doing a great job with the community and just building up different events and creating that space for all of us. Um, So yeah, a little bit about myself. I've been writing about Bitcoin since 2014. I've written about it with TechCrunch, VentureBeat, a lot of those traditional tech outlets, and I have found a perch at Forbes. And so I've been writing about U.S., China, geopolitics, all these heavy weighty things, along with that undercurrent, as we mentioned, of Bitcoin, stable coins, cryptocurrencies, this new financial world order that's kind of emerging around us, and usually anchored around some research around China and the US as well. I've also written about China since about 2019. I wrote some articles about the Hong Kong protests, and so a little bit of a mix of everything. And I recently published a book, I would say last year, about China and Bitcoin. So kind of combining those two passions together. And thank you for flashing that up. And it's Would Mao Hold Bitcoin? It's kind of a provocative title and cover. We think it might be an illegal cover in China, but that's all
Really,
good.
eh? Because of the eyes.
Well, it's technically like, Mao is a pretty revered figure. He's on the
Okay.
currency, and we put laser eyes on him and implied he was a Bitcoiner. So
Right.
I don't,
Okay.
well, I also actually, and since I'm on this train anyways, we also pixelated him,
Sure.
because it's, kind of a play on like, you can censor Bitcoin in China, but you can have Mao pixelated outside of it. So, you know, um,
Love it.
but all fun stuff, yeah, yeah. And it's been interesting, and because of that, I've been giving a lot of talks and had quite a few interviews about just the different topics. There's a lot of depth, and I'm sure we'll get into some of these topics. But of course, there's always the questions of China, the U.S., the relationship there, what's going on with the surveillance state in both countries, actually, and how do cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, and stable coins play a role in this emerging kind of technological change that we're seeing in front of us.
Awesome, man. That sounds like a great book, actually. I'm gonna have to look into that. I'd really like to check that out. Maybe I could even I like to get signed copies from my guests, so I don't know if I could order a copy directly from you. Maybe you could sign it, but we can talk about that later. Well, geez, wow, you got a lot of good topics in there. Where should we start? So I guess we'll start with the title. Would Mao hold Bitcoin? Did you come to a conclusion on that, or what are your thoughts? Your general thoughts?
People like to start with that. I have to say that it's like a little bit of clickbait, because the publisher made me change the name to include Bitcoin, which is probably a really good call, because originally the book was called One Country, Two Blockchains, which would have been entirely indecipherable, probably not super. Like, would you buy that, Curtis? Like One Country, Two Blockchains?
It's definitely less provocative, for sure.
Definitely less provocative. Definitely gets the people.
I would need one of you guys to explain to me the title a bit more, just given my knowledge on the stuff.
Oh yeah. So let me talk a little bit about would Mao hold Bitcoin, and then and first, the One Country, Two Blockchains thing is actually a reference to Hong Kong and China, right? So it's the one country and two systems. The idea that Hong Kong is a separate entity somewhat from the mainland. They have some things that are different, and we'll go into that because, for example, one of the things that's different is the treatment of Bitcoin in mainland China and Hong Kong. So that's traditionally what it's been called, one country, two systems. And of course, the blockchain technology that powers Bitcoin and is called blockchain, though that has some dubious meanings outside of that, is also kind of part of that framing, right? And the idea is that the Chinese government has embraced blockchain a lot. So see, I already spent all this time explaining it. And then, would Mao hold Bitcoin? A lot more provocative. What would be the answer to that question? I mean, the answer I usually give is yes, as a rebel. He had a time where he was living in the caves and really, trying to defy the nationalists. And when the nationalists were in power, they had an episode of hyperinflation. Of course, people in the West are very familiar with Weimar Germany and the fact that the Nazis ended up taking power, partially because there was a hyperinflation at that time. And something that's missed sometimes is that China also had a very similar episode, and the nationalists after World War II. And that is part of the reason why the communists, I think, took power. There were other reasons too, but the fact that the currency was inflating. I have a slide deck, and there's a girl from that period who's holding like $352,000 worth of Chinese currency, which is worth roughly 10 USD at the time, right? So just to get a sense, like it really was like the wheelbarrows and everything that you associate with Weimar Germany also happened in China. And so one of the first things that Mao did was actually strengthen central banking. He consolidated everything into the People's Bank of China, which continues to be the country's premier, or the only central bank, obviously, that still manages its monetary affairs to this day. So yes, as a rebel, no, as a tyrant. And we can kind of see some of this. We might dive into it later when you look at the People's Bank of China and how it continues to respond to Bitcoin.
Can I ask you, Roger, was this hyperinflation episode that happened in China? I know China's kind of been revered as the country that's created the first paper currency, and like were they on like a paper currency standard at that point that wasn't necessarily tied to any monetary metal?
Yeah, so exactly. And China's got a long history of paper money creation. There's a history of this, right? For example, the dynasties, and it's a pattern of history that's repeated itself quite often. Of course, the United States has lived through maybe like one or two cycles of history in that regard. China has lived through many, where the empire united and divided very often, right? And just to give a quick example, the Yuan dynasty, which was kind of, if you all remember Genghis Khan, who famously was reputed to be responsible for something like, don't fact check me on this, but no kidding, like some high percentage of Asian people descend from Genghis Khan, like a ridiculous amount of people. And part of the reason why he was able to do that was he was able to control this unified Mongolian empire that was able to unify commerce, the military, and everything regarded to that. That dynasty, which once controlled essentially half of the world, fell mostly because of inflation and hyperinflation at the time. So this is an episode that's kind of been seen before. And the nationalists, there was corruption, there was mismanagement, but China has gone back and forth between, having commodity-tied currencies and pure paper currencies. And typically when you have the paper currencies and they're not backed by any commodity or anything like that, that was kind of like a Chinese innovation, and then things go wrong. There's political changes and there's political upheaval. And that was one thing actually that Mao and the communists, I think, learned, that they needed strong control of the currency. And I mean, their solution for inflation was more like prices can't change because we're going to enforce it with guns. Like you're just not going to change prices. Like we, the state, determine prices, right? But I do think that reflects an understanding of this kind of cycle of political change along with ties to inflation. And one of the things that I go into with the book, actually, if you'll allow me to just elaborate a little bit further,
Absolutely.
is before Tiananmen Square, there was inflation. And people kind of forget about this period in Chinese history, but during the 1980s, China was going through the reform period. So Mao died in 1976. And then afterwards, modern China is really shaped by this leader, Jordan. I don't know how familiar you are with Chinese history, but Deng Xiaoping.
Okay.
He is kind of the architect of China the way it is today.
Is he the current guy
No.
running?
No.
Okay.
He died quite a while ago.
Oh, okay.
But
he came in right after Mao.
He came in right after Mao, and the way China's set up now is largely because of the way he set it up. Like in the sense of previously, before with Mao, you had to work in a commune. There wasn't really like private employment. Now in China, of course, it's a communist society, but then you say socialism with Chinese characteristics, right? There's private enterprise. There's a lot of Chinese people making a ton of money. How does that all exist? Well, Deng Xiaoping is that leader after Mao that kind of helped create this system where there was leadership changes, and not democratic in the sense of through a wider polity, but that the party would decide to change people at the helm. And so Xi Jinping, descends from that kind of legacy. His father was actually one of the kind of elder princes of the party, kind of the 8 elders, they kind of call them, that were really in power during this time with Deng Xiaoping. And again, with this theme of inflation and political upheaval, there were 2 factions in China at the time. There was one faction that wanted to consolidate state control. And then there was one faction that was like a little bit more liberal. Yeah, Deng Xiaoping, you're pulling him up. He's yeah, he died in 1997. Yeah, that's correct. So he was sort of the power behind the scenes. He's the one who's kind of created modern China the way we see it now. And Hu Yaobang, which is actually his general secretary, and Zhao Ziyang were actually kind of reformers. They were looking to do political and economic reforms. And in fact, they suggested that democracy might be a solution for, or I mean, they didn't quite say it in that way, but Zhao Ziyang, especially in his later years, was, I think, inclined to think that there needed to be political reform. And then there was a faction that was very concerned with having economic reform, but tightly controlling the party and tightly controlling the political apparatus. And that actually faction ended up winning because after Mao died, there was inflation. Because as soon as you got rid of the guns that were controlled, as soon as you said there isn't a price mandate, I mean, there was 18.5% annualized inflation at a certain point. People just weren't used to that. So there were goods flying off the shelves. And so that's some context for some of the protests that happened around that time, including most famously Tiananmen Square. So just harping all the way back, I know my book talks mostly about Bitcoin and China, but just even that additional context of like that history of inflation, as well as political upheaval has played out throughout China for a very long time. So I feel like I've been in this big rabbit hole, so I just want to turn it over to you all.
No, man, that's why you guys are here, man. That's why you guys are here to talk. So feel free. So what would you say I guess two-part question. What would you say the state is in China now with regards to, inflation and some of the parameters you were talking about?
Yeah.
And then follow-up question, where does China sit officially with, cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin and all that stuff?
Yeah, I'll try to be a little bit briefer in the reply. So the current state, China is a mixed economy, right? And the party maintains a lot of control. Obviously, the leader Xi Jinping right now has a lot of control over even private enterprise, right? There are these companies that you can make a lot of money. There are a lot of Chinese billionaires, but there are tight capital controls. So of course, money has to kind of remain in the system, and there are political controls as well. Like for example, you can be asked to apologize to the state. You can be temporarily disappeared, as happened to Jack Ma, famously, of Alibaba. So there is that kind of mix. But right now, currently, China is kind of going through a little bit of a deflationary period. And it seems that China has, I think in a genuine way, China has really in the process of outcompeting the United States on several critical fronts, and electric vehicle manufacturing, shipbuilding, and all this other stuff. I think the last 20 or 30 years, which we can dive into a little bit more, but the last 20 or 30 years has really been the story of the United States exporting. Yeah, that's Xi Jinping right there, our favorite comrade. So I think the story of the last 20, 30 years has really been the United States deciding that the American consumer wants cheaper prices, so we're going to offshore manufacturing, right? And then China is the first power that's also a credible military competitor or a near peer in military affairs. That's different because the United States had a similar thing where, if you remember, Japan used to manufacture all these cars, and that was kind of like the craze back then. It's like, how do we defend ourselves against Honda and Toyota?
Right.
But China is a little bit of a different beast. And the reason why is because China is a geopolitical rival. And Japan, in a way, Japan never was. Because, for example, Japan doesn't have an active offensive military, and China very much does. So China right now has the ability to be producing all these things at very, very cheap cost. And I think that has implications for geopolitics beyond just economic, because, for example, now China is able to build ships very quickly.
Okay.
And conceivably can go to war to some degree. Now, cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, and all these other things, they're protected by the courts as property. So if you have Bitcoin, and a lot of Chinese people, because Bitcoin mining and Bitcoin exchanges, a lot of them actually started in China. For example, some of the largest Bitcoin exchanges we know, Binance is probably the most famous example. It was a Chinese company. I mean, CZ started it in China. They had to move out because, a lot of them were banned or they were threatened and all this other stuff with different legal actions. And so throughout the years, what's basically happened is China has made it very clear that they will not accept the use of Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies like that as a currency. And they have arrested people for using stable coins and things like that. So it's not just like a toothless thing. There are people that have been arrested. I wrote a report about that. There's like 1,200 people since 2022. Now, normally people get arrested. It's a little bit like, you have to go out of your way a little bit to get arrested. Like there's this one case where someone was like, hey, like I got all of my stable coins stolen from this unreputable dealer. And then the police were like, are you like reporting to us that you had and you were trying to use currencies in this way? It's a little bit like going to the cops and being like, hey, they stole my crack.
Yeah.
And you're like,
Okay.
then you're like a cop. Yeah, that's like one story that happened, right? So it's a
that
little like,
and sorry, that's all of China?
oh, what do you mean, like the ban? Or
Yeah, like
it's all of mainland China. So
Okay.
that like earlier on we were talking a little bit about Hong Kong. Hong Kong's a little different, right? So Hong Kong right now you can actually go, and it's actually pretty cool. You can go to Hong Kong right now, and in some ways it's less restricted than places in the West because you can show up with a bunch of cash, you can buy a bunch of Bitcoin, Lightning, or other cryptocurrencies or stable coins, or you can trade the other way around, and they won't take your ID, and you can just kind of go off the street and just kind of trade. In Canada and the States, like if you try to trade, there's, and we'll probably get into this, but there's obviously a lot of know your customer restrictions, right? So for example, if you're trying to trade with an exchange or anything like that, you've got to provide some kind of government ID. So Hong Kong is very different. But yes, across mainland China, which I would define as all of the provinces except for Hong Kong, Macau, basically. And so Hong Kong and Macau are like slightly different because they're special administrative regions. Macau isn't really particularly known for Bitcoin and cryptocurrency stuff, but Hong Kong, they've launched, of course, a spot Bitcoin ETF. They've launched a spot Ethereum ETF. So there's definitely a little bit of a different dynamic there.
And, Roger, how easy is it to get money from China into Hong Kong if you're, say, like living in mainland China? And the reason why I asked that is it surprises me that China's kind of flagged things like Bitcoin as private property, and it is legal to own, because it's definitely like there is a lot of folks that might not trust their wealth being in a Chinese bank account, and they're looking to be able to evade things like capital controls. So how easy would it be for someone to be able to get their money from China into Hong Kong?
Relatively easy. Like people open up Hong Kong bank accounts all the time, right? I guess what I would say is like one thing is that you're pulling up I guess mainland China. So right over the border is actually Shenzhen, which is kind of like the metronome city where all the smart hardware and everything happens. It's also got like really cheap massage parlors, but like that's like a different topic.
Good to know. Good to know. Thank you.
Yeah. So if you're ever going, they got like a cool little train that goes all the way through. But yeah, that's Hong Kong, and Macau is kind of like the green and Macau is kind of more known for like gambling and like casinos and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's I think Sheldon Adelson actually opened up like a huge mega resort. Adelson, who's the big mega donor who owns all those casinos in Vegas. I believe he's dead. I believe he's dead now, but his wife is still the owner of the Dallas Mavericks, to the fury of anybody who saw Luka Doncic get traded.
Yes. I heard there's some really interesting theories as to why she did that. I don't know if you're up on that, but
yeah, I could be up on that. I don't know if it's the topic of this like particular podcast, but
yeah,
if you want to talk about my Luka Doncic conspiracy theories, I got some too.
Okay, for next time.
You want to do that? Yeah, we'll note that. But yeah, so that's kind of the dynamic of it, and it's pretty easy. But I guess the point I was trying to make with that, Curtis, is look, like Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies is kind of like a drop in the bucket compared to the numerous ways people can get money out of China, right? This is maybe one of the largest drivers of the world economy is people from China trying to get money outside of it, right? And the way the restriction works is like it's a restriction where you have to ask a government agency if you want to buy more than 50,000 USD worth of foreign currency a year. So like suppose I was going on a trip somewhere. I could then say like, hey, like I need like $100,000 USD. I'm just touristing, I'm doing all this other stuff. So you just have to report that to the agency. They would probably give you permission. But there's like a million ways. I mean, there's this stuff called smurfing where you get multiple, like I don't know if you guys ever saw Wolf of Wall Street, right?
Yep.
And obviously there's that scene where it's like they're taping money to like the Stooges or whatever who are crossing the border. And
Right.
it's very I gotta say one thing about Chinese people, much love, is like they're always looking for ways to like beat the system. And smurfing is like kind of like the caveman thought. It's like, well, if the limit is $50,000 per person per year, China's got like a lot of people. Like, why don't we just transfer through other people? So you have all these funny things where it's like, oh, all of a sudden you have 10 or 20 people, it's like a cousin of a cousin or like whatever, and they're all transferring money over and they're using kind of their limit, right? Because everybody's kind of got a limit imposed on them. And so that's an example. And the thing is like, there's like misreported travel vouchers, there's all this stuff. Famously, there's all these examples of Chinese people buying up real estate, Chinese people buying up luxury goods abroad. And some of that is driven by the fact that they're just trying to get money out of the system. These are like well-known things that like help people flow currency out. So whereas Bitcoin and all these other things, like, yeah, I mean, I think the Chinese state is generally annoyed by them. I think the central bank would much rather that people use the central bank digital currency, which China has the most advanced version of, because they can maintain that kind of control, right? But it's not as if it's like the biggest factor. Like, they know that people are cheating this system in other ways, right? Because like it's just like there's so much money in China and people just want to get it out, right? Because they don't want to just spend money on Chinese goods and stocks. They want to buy stuff from across the world. They want to have investments in other countries. They, maybe you don't want to have all your eggs in one basket, especially in a basket like China, where you can get prosecuted, you can get political kind of like consequences. Yeah. So hopefully that helps elevate that, Curtis. It's pretty easy, but I was actually thinking about, I mean, it's probably not like the best idea for my continued safety, but I was trying to think about like creating a list in English and Mandarin of all the different ways you can probably buy Bitcoin from the mainland. There's like a million different ways.
Wow.
It's crazy. Yeah, it's like different people have different ways. They're all there, and it's like, it's just one of those things where I wouldn't do it as like a particular thing. I wouldn't encourage people to do it for sure, but like it's just they're like, I've actually documented so many different ways. People put fake addresses, people register a Hong Kong bank account, they register a Hong Kong account. Some people buy like a citizenship from like Palau. It's like $1,000 or something apparently, and it's kind of like an e-citizenship, so they can buy crypto that way. So there's just like a lot of different ways to get around these restrictions.
Wow. Getting into current and future Chinese-U.S. relations, and if we can get into Canadian relations as well, if you'd like. What are your guys' thoughts on the meeting this year with Putin, Xi Jinping, and Kim Jong Un? And they met, which was kind of a big deal on its own, but I believe it was
during the military parade.
It was exactly. It was the military parade as well, and they seemed to. I think I could be wrong, but didn't they unveil like quite a few new technologies that they had? And regardless, they showed a lot of different things. It was quite the flex. It was quite the flex. So, what are your guys' thoughts on that meeting when it comes to their relations at the meeting, as well as what that's going to mean for the U.S.?
Curtis, you want to start?
No, you can go ahead, Roger.
I want to hear from the golden voice.
Well, to me, it feels like at least the basis of it is like the enemy of what's the saying? How does the saying go? It's
enemy of my enemy is my friend,
right? And it's like this is the response to the U.S. hegemony, being so prevalent, and also having their own kind of strong-fisted grip on the financial system, right? With like the U.S. Confiscating Russia's reserves and at the start of the war with Ukraine. So, yeah.
No, for sure. Kim Jong Un always looking healthy, I love that clip. I don't know if you all have ever seen the Curb Your Enthusiasm meme, where it's like Trump is like, oh, let's all get into a frame so we all look fit and healthy and and slim, and then it just pans to Kim Jong Un's face and he's just like, this guy calling me fat. So sometimes geopolitics is very personal. So listen, the context of this is like, and there's several foreign leaders I should mention in this shot, right? Like, you can actually see Lushenko, who's Belarus's leader, is to the right. And the context of this, Indonesia's leader is right there as well. And the context of this is during Beijing's military parade, right? They were kind of showing off their technology. Of course, the three people that were kind of highlighted that are walking together in the front are Putin, Xi, and Kim Jong Un. Although it should also be noted that several Central Asian leaders, I believe Erdogan from Turkey also attended, although he did not attend the particular military parade. So there was a meeting before, I believe, of the Shanghai Cooperative Organization, which is kind of like an alternative version of NATO, for lack of a better word. I mean, it's not quite like NATO, but the idea is to create, to Curtis's point, a kind of counterpoint to Western hegemony. And so several leaders have kind of flitted through. Famously, Modi actually went also. So that's kind
Right.
of an interesting thing
Yeah,
to look
yeah,
at.
that's great.
There's also an interesting thing to look at because, of course, under the Trump administration, Modi has been kind of ostracized, and they've had tariffs imposed. And traditionally, India and China have been at loggerheads, and at some points have been in military conflict. It's kind of crazy. They have this thing every once in a while where India and China, they'll fight each other, but in order to prevent there from being active warfare, yes, that's Modi, the Prime Minister of India. They actually only fight each other with sticks and stones. It's kind of crazy to see. Like, if you ever look it up on the video, it's like you'll see
I
these
think
like,
I've seen videos of that actually. Yeah.
yeah, they do that because if there was an active war, like, or if someone shot someone, then there probably be reprisals, and it might be the beginning of like a conflict between two nuclear armed states, right? So anyways, just to set some broader context for like that particular meeting. And then in the military parade, China unveiled several new technologies. I think there was a lot of focus on, for example, the robot dogs and drone warfare. That was definitely a theme. I think, of course,
Yeah.
China is studying what is happening in Ukraine very closely, and just to see kind of, and they were getting kind of a show of like what are some American military capabilities, because of course the United States has given so much aid to Ukraine, and they're seeing how some of the Russian models and some of the Chinese models are kind of fighting. India and Pakistan actually briefly engaged in conflict, which is very interesting because Pakistan uses a lot of Chinese military equipment. And it was rumored that they shot down some of the Indian French fighters, the Mirage jets that they had. And so, you're starting to see some of these like reps in practice. So, of course, coming all the way through after all that context, you see those three leaders united, and you wonder, as in the famous words of the poet and poet, philosopher King George W. Bush, whether or not an axis of evil is being formed again, or an axis of evil. Yeah, this is what I'm talking about. Yeah, they it's kind of crazy if you watch the videos. It's kind of like they're like it's like really weird to see because they're like beating each other, and then they're like throwing stones at each other and stuff. It's like kind of a little wild. But I guess we should be thankful about that because it means they're not in nuclear war. Yeah, they're like, it's like Lord of the Rings or something.
LARPing.
Yeah, they're like
Serious LARPing.
no, that's some pretty big LARPing there. Curtis, this is real LARPing, man. This is a LARPing that will keep us alive. And they're all kind of, they don't want to like start any drama. I mean, I actually wonder what would happen if some guy just pulled out a gun. Just be like,
I know,
I'm
right?
tired
And
of
just
this.
like tricked ya.
Yeah, just like, but yeah, that's kind of what they do up there. This is like kind of in the Himalayas because most of the border regions, so it's very mountainous. So yeah, they're kind of, and look, the Chinese troops are all like COVID masked up, so
Yeah.
they're safe. They're safe from COVID from the Indian trips, but of course, not so safe from getting beaten from sticks. Might be a more immediate worry. So yeah, like just to try to conclude that thought, I mean, China has supported Russia throughout the Ukraine war, and in a very major economic way. And Russia has shifted a lot of its exports through pipelines that run through to China, and has made capital investments in pipeline expansion. And the idea is that Russia, of course, now thinks of Europe and the United States as completely unreliable as economic partners, as trade allies, as anything. And the US has actually been seizing oil tankers because of the whole Venezuela thing, right? So that,
Right.
again, reinforces the point. So, of course, where do you go? You look to the east, right? And so, of course, there's increasing economic dependence. There are rumors of like Chinese more military involvement. I mean, one of the things I think China is trying to really gauge is trying to understand how its military equipment will perform in an actual war. Because China has not fought an actual war for quite a long time. The last war that China fought was its invasion of Vietnam, and that was by Deng Xiaoping. The guy we just said died in 1997. So this was quite a while ago, right? So it's an open question. The Chinese military has gone through some corruption scandals recently. They had some missiles that were filled with water. There was some bribery alleged and all this other stuff. So I
I'm
think
sorry,
it's a
this isn't
worry.
Chinese military?
The Chinese military, yeah, correct. The
filled with
People's
water.
Liberation.
Wow.
Yeah, there's like a missile. You can kind of look up. There's like a corruption scandal. There's several people who are like arrested, expelled from the party. I think potentially they might have the death penalty or something, but I need to be fact checked on that. But yeah, several senior defense members and senior generals. That's been kind of like a running scandal in China right now. And the question is whether or not China is ready. They might not seek to start a war, but they want to know that their military stack is ready and comparable. And Ukraine gives them the opportunity to kind of test that a little bit, right? They can give military aid, even through the Iranians, the Shahed drones, right, that are going to Ukraine. There are Chinese mercenaries that are fighting in Ukraine. This is like a well-known thing, right? There's North Korean troops that were sent there, especially in the Kursk, I think, border region. But also there are some Chinese mercenaries, and there's been Chinese social media of people talking about. It's kind of funny. There's like this one video of this Chinese mercenary who's like, "Yo, the North Koreans, they're getting smoked. Like they're getting like murked out there. Like we sent like 100 of them out there, and like all 100 of them died." Like, like so, they're starting to see that though. They're starting to see like, well, how do we? And I'm sure, even though it's unofficial, right? Like, I'm sure that some of that gets reported back to the Chinese state. And so I think the Chinese state is, in a position where it's like, look, they might start treating us like Russia. And in any case, the United States has started threatening secondary sanctions on banks that deal with Russia, right? And they implemented the tariffs on India because of the Russian, well, that was the purported reason, was because Russia was selling oil to India, right? So this is not Trump is tariff prone anyways, and so just giving this kind of an excuse, isn't very far from being plausible. So I think China's really trying to weigh its options here, and that's, I think, part of the reason why gold is going up in price so much is because China's buying so much gold, right? Like the central bank is buying gold, and because they're looking to be economically independent, and they're looking to be able to do tit for tat. So now with the United States and the relationship, we're kind of at like a little bit of an impasse, right? It's not like quite an active thing. The US and China are talking to one another, trade deals. There's no like active war, but China just recently sanctioned um, several defense executives and companies for shipping military aid to Taiwan. And I think the reason why they did that was to show like whatever you guys can do, the United States does, we can now do back to you. Like we're not afraid to like retaliate. And typically China will do two or three things that I've seen. One is that they will go after close American allies. So there was a famous instance, Japan, the leadership there was talking about Taiwan, and so China implemented a travel warning, and they banned imports. In Canada, they've been banning imports of, I think, like certain key commodities, including, I believe, canola oil and shellfish. Like, so they can shut the market off to these different allies. They do that to the United States as well, but that's been elevated somewhat by the negotiations that's going on. So for a while, they weren't buying U.S. soybeans. But now they seem to be starting to rebuy because they want to show that them and I mean, still the United States has a lot of pressure. But to your earlier point of like China-Canada relations, anybody that's not the US, they don't really hold back anymore. Like, so for example, in Canada, we had two Canadians, the two Michaels, that were basically detained arbitrarily in China.
Okay.
Yeah, and they were held, and it was tit for tat because there was a Huawei, the daughter of the Huawei founder, was held under Canadian custody on behalf of the United States, actually. And then when she was released, the two Michaels were released, right? Is that a coincidence? I don't think so, right? But so China definitely feels very comfortable to be able to say like, hey, Australia, we don't like what you're doing, so like screw you, we're not going to import your meat. Or Canada, we don't like what you're doing. Screw you. We're not going to import this, right? And then Canada can be like, please open the markets, but China doesn't care. But if the United States is like, hey, like, we want you to import soybeans, and China will still listen. So that's kind of like where the state of affairs is right now. I do think China is preparing for a world where, there's less economic dependency on the states, and they famously have threatened and will probably carry out. I think the one area they can hit the United States the most is rare earths. That's been a
Right.
very very
Rare earths
specific
and
topic.
minerals. Yeah, that's been a big one. Came up, yeah, it's been coming up quite a few times this year, especially like I think it was 3 months ago or something. It was a pretty big deal for sure.
They because they can threaten to ban exports, and then the United States is kind of like not able to create semiconductors and all other stuff.
Yeah. So what do you guys think happens then if that gets really hairy and we have to start, or well, the U.S. for argument's sake has to start looking elsewhere?
Well, this is the interesting part about it is that like a lot of the like US's military production has, it's something that you would use, for your for national defense, but a lot of it's being outsourced to China at the end of the day, whether it comes from the manufactured parts like the semiconductors that go into that, or the raw materials itself, like rare earth metals. But to me, like Roger, like it kind of feels to me like China's obviously arming up, and they are building up quite a military and navy, of course. But it doesn't really feel like China to me. I get the sense that going to hot war is not how China projects power. Like I don't really see a situation where China goes and takes Taiwan by force, but rather it kind of feels like it's more around economic power. It can be around social and political power. Some of the ways that Hong Kong has kind of lost this, true separation where it's, one country, two systems, is through the infiltration of the courts and the political structure, and also, using propaganda where if you go on, YouTube, you'll see, endless YouTube, Chinese language videos about how the Chinese state is, and their model of doing things is superior to, any type of Western system. And, that gets a lot of people who, might live in Hong Kong or live in Taiwan, in favor of becoming, a Chinese state, which eventually swings the political power slowly in the courts and so on. And that, to me, like I get the sense that that is truly how China projects power, and they're not really interested in getting into a hot war. Of course, you need some sort of deterrent to invade, right? So I think the military is kind of table stakes, but and we see situations where like the US has, recently they sent, I think it was $30 billion worth of
military aid to Taiwan.
Right? Which is a huge statement, right? They're saying that like, hey, like we're defending Taiwan's sovereignty, because this is strategically important for the US. But at the same time, it kind of feels like maybe it's, this is all just saber rattling at the end of the day, because the way that China plans to take over Taiwan is to change the sentiment of the people towards China and slowly overtake the political system, and until they get to the point where the CCP has control of it anyways.
Yeah, I certainly think that well, so first of all, going all the way back to the rare earths and semiconductors, just to like kind of finish that up, rare earths, I think that's what the Trump administration has been trying to call out, right? And that's the beginning of kind of like their now round of sanctions on China, is because of that threat of the rare earth kind of export ban. I don't think the United States immediately has an option. Now, one of the things is that rare earths are not actually that rare. But what is hard with them, and again, I'm speaking a little bit out of school, but from a general perspective, like what is hard about them is the processing and the environmental standards that would require. So I think there is a way to source alternatives for that. In terms of semiconductors, the latest generation of semiconductors, they're all manufactured in Taiwan. There is a set of a company called TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation, which kind of manufactures the latest generation. So one that NVIDIA uses, they're the ones that go into the latest Bitcoin miners. They have created a factory in Phoenix, Arizona, and I think specifically for some kind of situation like if Taiwan were to be cut off from the world, there would at least be this option. TSMC, that's the company. They're actually I don't know if this is alpha for your audience, but they're a publicly traded company. Anyways, so Yeah, no, Curtis, to what you were saying about war, I certainly think what you're saying is true, and I want to align on that. Like, I don't think China is looking for a hot war, for sure. I think that China still thinks of itself as behind the curve, because they need certain things like a navy that's a true blue water navy, a navy that can actually, contest or fight with the U.S. Pacific Fleet to some degree, right? And I don't think they think they're quite there. I go back and forth on this, and a while ago, I had a really interesting interview actually with Taiwan. There was a guy who was the former chief of staff of Taiwan's military, and they have a lot of planning for what will happen in the case that this conflict becomes kinetic. So the facts on the ground are that like China is vast. It's a vastly asymmetric war. China is able to spend a lot more, regardless of any U.S. aid to Taiwan. Like China just every year is spending more on its military than what the Taiwan is, and then what United States is able to dedicate to military aid to Taiwan. Right? That's just like the reality. So the chief of staff, they have outlined a plan where if it comes to an actual invasion, they are going to go to an asymmetric total war, which is like they're going to arm the civilians. There are civilians that are, training first aid and all this other stuff. They are preparing to go out to the mountains and fight with latest platforms. They're sourcing drones that can, combat boats. They are really trying to play out the scenario of like, we're going to arm everyone and go up to the hills and all this stuff, because that's probably the only way that they could sustain or maintain an insurgency. And of course, the implication is that now, in their planning, what they say, Taiwan defense officials, is that we do not expect the American people to lose a single American life to our defense. We expect the Taiwanese people to maintain an existential. So their defense planning accounts for that. Their defense planning accounts for the baseline scenario being that the United States would not intervene militarily. Now, having said all this, I don't think this is the most likely scenario. I think it's quite a few off, few years maybe, of this even becoming like a planned reality. But I will say two things. One is that people, I think especially in the West, do not recognize how existential Taiwan is to Xi Jinping's legacy, to Chinese social media, to like kind of the ethos of the nationalist achievement. To Xi Jinping, this is legacy defining. And so when we say what will happen to Taiwan, I want to say that of course he wants political reconciliation and economic reconciliation to dominate Taiwan the way he did Hong Kong. But Taiwan right now has shown signs of resisting that. The current leadership is the Democratic Progressive Party, the DPP, which are traditionally more of a pro-independence faction. And right now, the way the United States structures its relationship with China is the Taiwan Relations Act. And neither recognizes Taiwan as a state, but it also challenges mainland China to say, we will, if you try to forcefully change Taiwan's status, we reserve the right to intervene. Now, what that means is that I think China obviously would want the nationalists to win. And the Nationalist Party is a party that has its roots. We just talked about them, the corruption. They left the mainland. So they actually see themselves now as integrated with the mainland in a way that this other party does not. And so when it comes to Taiwan, the possibility of there being an independence movement has grown stronger and stronger as time has gone on. So it seems like the currents are going against Chinese political kind of exertion. So there may be a situation where he's getting old. He might think this is legacy defining. And so I would not preclude I don't think it's likely, but I would not preclude there being kinetic conflict. I actually think the most likely scenario, and the one that I'm most worried about, and this is me again. This is my pay grade is way too low to be predicting, wars and everything like that. I'm just a simple author that wrote a book about Bitcoin in China, but I do think that the scenario I worry most about, and that has come up in war planning, is not a full-on invasion, is rather the Chinese Navy blockading Taiwan and saying like, we are going to search every ship and make sure Taiwan doesn't get any military equipment. because that's kind of like a gray area where China would essentially challenge the United States and say, what are you going to do about this? And what we've seen is, I think that under certain presidents, because of the Taiwan Relations Act, it really will be the president who's currently in power that will determine the response, along with Congress, right? But really, the president has a lot of latitude. So if you have a certain executive and legislative in the United States that just decides we're really isolationist. Let's say JD Vance wins, and he's like, of course we will come to the defense of Taiwan if China comes in guns blazing and kills a bunch of Americans while they're bombing Taipei, right? That's like casus belli. Sure. If they do what Russia did to Ukraine, right, which actually surprised me a lot, where Russia just decided to go first day, like they started bombing Kiev and doing all this crazy stuff. And I think that's why Europe and the US responded so fiercely, was because it was so out of proportion, right? But if China does something in the middle where they're like, we have a naval blockade, Taiwan is our backyard. Like, we have a Monroe Doctrine too. Like, it's not really your business. And so, see, the thing with Taiwan is very dependent on imports, agricultural imports, energy imports. All that has to come through ship. So that's actually the scenario I worry most about for Taiwan, at least, is, and for deterioration, the U.S.-China relationship and how to test it is some kind of naval blockade where it's not quite clear that China is actually forcefully doing anything. It's like they have their naval ships and they're like, we're just trying to check all these ships that come through. Now, of course, the United States has had a presumptive role of being the world policeman for shipping lanes. That's why the United States takes the lead on the Houthis and all this other stuff if there's pirating. But it's quite different to challenge the United States and say, like, hey, we're like a regional naval power. If you mess with us, you're messing with a nuclear armed power. That, I think that would be closer to like the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Mhm.
And then it would really depend on who blinked first or what the variables were. And I do think China would not come in guns blazing. I would be very, very surprised. Again, I was surprised by Russia, so who knows? But I think that there's that gray area scenario, and depending on which U.S. president is in power, especially if they're very isolationist, then I think Taiwan will be left to its own devices. And I'm not sure. I mean, this is me commenting a little out of scope, but I'm not sure Taiwan is super prepared for that, because I see like this idea that there's going to be an asymmetric total war, but Taiwan has very strict gun laws. So it's not like Switzerland. The Nazis never invaded Switzerland because it's super hilly and all those people have guns. It's like, what's the point, right? But Taiwan, super hilly, but they have a lot of gun restrictions. So maybe there's some issues there.
I mean, Roger, I can throw in some anecdotes about, Taiwan's military preparedness for some sort of invasion. So my partner is Taiwanese, and growing up in Taipei, they would regularly receive pamphlets as to like, what are the citizens to do in the scenario where, you're being invaded and, there's like a media blackout, and it has just like very specific instructions that this is what the plan is. And they're very entrenched as well. Like, the neighborhood where, she grew up,
Yeah.
Daji, just north of that, there's a mountainous region with a military base. And I was driving through there last year, and her dad was describing to me how the entire mountain is basically full of tunnels. And all of those tunnels are, harboring military equipment that's ready to be rolled out, that is going to be resistant towards bombing, that is going to allow them to be able to, fight like a very trench warfare style defense, where, they're able to kind of pop out in different places where they're unexpected. So they are very prepared for that, hot war scenario. But I mean, that's a really great point, Roger, that, for a Navy blockade, what do they do in that case? Does the U.S. try to set up their own counter blockade that allows ships to pass? I mean, it's, it really is a Mexican standoff at that point.
Yeah, so that's the scenario I worry most about. And no, I think the Taiwanese, I mean, they've prepared a lot. I talked with the defense staff, and I'm not someone who necessarily goes to. I actually grew up on the other side, so it's funny because I saw all the missiles being pointed at Taiwan. So that was my childhood. So your partner was getting the pamphlets, being like, "Hey, this is what happens when we invade." Does it just say like strap up, fools? No, I'm kidding. I shouldn't say that, but I mean that's if I were the minister. That's why nobody puts me in charge of anything serious. If I were the minister of defense or national preparedness, I'd just be like, strap up, yo, like we're ready. But no, but I grew up on the other side. So the other side, it's kind of a really weird vibe because you're driving down the coast, you can play some really nice music, and it's they just got missile silos like on the coastline. Because I grew up in I was actually born in the city of China that is the closest to Taiwan. There's parts of Taiwan, the islands that are China. So definitely have seen some of that, but yeah, it's just something that I've noticed is like they have some contingency planning, but I wonder sometimes if that there's a lot of first aid courses and stuff, and people are preparing in that way, and I think it's kind of weird to think about that they're a society that's permanently kind of prepared for some kind of invasion. Very similar to South Korea, by the way. Seoul also has like they're always ready for North Korea to start raining artillery onto Seoul, right? Very, very weird, different context. I have all the sympathy in the world for Taiwanese people, including your partner and all others who are kind of like that's their life, and that's not a life that I lived. So I don't really know. I just do find it funny because they do have very strict gun laws, and I'm always wondering if that actually, just from a meta perspective, like I'm not in it, but I'm like, does that serve? Because you have your military saying like we're gonna fight them in the hills, and we have like all this equipment ready, right? But the reality is that mainland China has like 30x the people of some such of Taiwan, right? So then it's like, well, if your people don't have the ability to defend themselves in that way, maybe that's a gap. But again, so don't listen to me. I'm the guy who's like, here's my instruction for you all, like strap up, get ready. I don't know.
Before we, two quick questions before we get into surveillance states. We got a question or a comment here from the audience about China lying about their population. I don't know, Kurtis, if you know anything on that, but Roger, what are your thoughts on that? Have you seen any materials that talk about China fudging the numbers on their population, and why would they do that?
Well, just in general, like you have to I think I take Chinese government stats with a little bit of a grain of salt, right?
Okay.
Like you kind of have to look around and reinforce it with different things. China's population has been shrinking, and the birth rate is quite low, and those are, I think, well-known issues. So I think there might be an incentive, especially for certain provinces and other places, to over-report that there's more births and stuff like that, just to show against that curve. But yeah, I mean, I think the macro picture is probably pretty accurate. I don't think China shies away from that particular element where it's like, there's always some fudging potentially and all this stuff. Like I think things aren't necessarily reliable, but I think the macro narrative that there's less young people than there are old people, that's going to be true. I think the narrative that because of the one child rule, there's like 30 or 40 million men that are just going to grow up without. That's kind of like where I sometimes think like if you're a society or a state like that, that might just lend itself to more warlike scenarios because you got like 30 or 40 million men that may never marry, right? And they want to marry. So it's like, what do you do with forget the blockade, Kurtis? What do you do if you got 30 or 40 million incels? Like forget the counter blockade. Like what are you gonna do about that? So there's I think yeah, so I think in general that would be like the broad answer that I would give. Like probably broad wise the story matches what's happening. But yeah, there's probably some fudging going on with all the numbers. But Kurtis, curious to hear your thoughts.
Well, I mean, probably, right? And I think you probably hit the nail on the head where it's really the incentive structures of like reporting good numbers back to your superiors that it's like it's probably not like even if the national government or the CCP is releasing the numbers that they get, the data could be ugly. But I think like in the context of like between China and what it has the ability to do economically versus the rest of the world, or like, what does that situation look like in a conflict with another country like Taiwan? What's clear is that there's a lot of people in China, and they have economically, and if you look at the cities, and maybe the population of the cities is inflated by even 5 or 10%, which would be an absolutely huge number. There's still a lot of people there. So
Yeah. If y'all,
Oh, sorry. Keep going, Roger. Go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, if y'all ever go to like a Hong Kong or Guangzhou or Fuzhou or Shanghai, like you'll see people, man. There's definitely people. They're not fudging the they're not fudging the people. They're not fudging the people.
Nice. Final question before we move on. What question for both of you guys? What is the current mood, so to speak, in the markets with crypto, and what do you see to 2026 looking like with crypto
Curtis, you go.
generally?
yeah, I mean, the mood is that, Roger and I just for context, like we supposed to specifically think that a lot of crypto is noise, that Bitcoin is the only that's the signal in a room full of noise, and
Right, we talked about that.
yeah, and kind of starting from there, Bitcoin is because it's a free market, it's subject to so many different forces, whether that's a monetary and fiscal policy by governments, whether it's by incentives that are created for regular folks like you and me of how to actually be able to preserve our purchasing power and save our money in a world that we're seeing inflation happen. So there's a lot of forces going on here, right? There are governments that have been quietly or not quietly acquiring Bitcoin, and you see things like Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund. You see things like the country of Bhutan. You see places like El Salvador that have been accumulating Bitcoin for their own reserves in a similar way that Roger mentioned earlier about China accumulating gold. And these are all countries and sovereigns and individuals. We all operate within a system of incentives, and China's incentive here is to they were historically like a really huge buyer of US treasuries, right? They have a huge export surplus because they're exporting more goods to the US in exchange for US dollars. And what do they do with those US dollars? They have to go somewhere, right? And you don't just want to hold US dollars because they're subject to inflation. So you can go ahead and purchase US treasury bonds and earn a return on those and use that as a savings account for later. And when the US comes around and they confiscate the reserves of other countries, and you don't really trust US dollars or US treasury reserves anymore, what do you do with that money? Well, you can go ahead and sell those treasury bonds. You can get US dollars for it, and you can buy gold with it. And gold still has much of its use as a monetary metal, and that is able to protect their their purchasing power and being able to facilitate trade with other states. So we're all subject to these same kind of market forces, whether you're a state or whether you're an individual. And as far as Bitcoin goes right now, I think that in the last 2 years, it has appreciated quite a bit because it is slowly, I think people are slowly starting to see it as, a way to be able to, protect your wealth against inflation, and also be able to, move your wealth around the world if you want to do so, and in a permissionless way. But I think there's a lot of fear in the markets right now as well, right? I think Bitcoin's historically gone through these 4-year cycles of price appreciation and when market crashes. And I think that there's almost an expectation that that's going to play out again, which is also being seen in the price right now, which, we're down from a high of about 125,000 US dollars, and we're down to around 88,000 US dollars right now. But what I'm seeing as well is that there's a lot of liquidity that's starting to come back into the market, right? We've had like higher interest rates in the States for a couple of years at this point, and a lot of the quantitative tightening that has been happening over the last 2-3-ish years is starting to slow. And as more money comes back into the market, whether that's through issuing new loans with like declining interest rates for purchase of houses and things like that, whether that's government deficits and fiscal policies continuing to inject more money into the economy. The place that often finds that money finds its home in is a place where people, want to be able to protect themselves for the inflation that's probably going to be coming back again over the next couple of years. And so I think that Bitcoin is an expression of what people think money is going to be worth, or US dollars are going to be worth in the future, which is less, which means that I think Bitcoin is going to appreciate in that market condition as well. So it's really hard to say. The price moves and everyone tries to look for an explanation as to like why it went up or why it went down. But the truth of it is that sometimes on some days people purchase more and some days people sell more, and that's kind of what affects the price. But all of those things are being affected by these various forces, whether it's monetary policy, whether it's inflation, whether it's countries trying to build their own sovereign reserves.
Yeah.
Roger?
Yeah, I think, so first I have to confirm that Kurtis interrogated me in a club bathroom and got me to spill all my views. Otherwise, he wouldn't have invited me onto the show. And so, yes, I am a Bitcoin Bitcoin maxi, I guess you can say. I've had my own journey through this, writing about the space for a very long time. But now currently kind of Bitcoin is the signal, other cryptos are the noise. I think just to add on, I think Kurtis did a really good job of summing up just like kind of where we're at. I'd probably add like just 2 factors to his answer, and then we can move on to the surveillance states. The first is that one thing to keep in mind is that Bitcoin and other cryptos to a certain extent are hyper sensitive to changes in global liquidity.
Mhm.
And so that is kind of the correlation, is that when liquidity goes down, Bitcoin tends to depreciate. And when liquidity goes up, Bitcoin tends to go up. And it tends to follow that by a certain degree, like that level of global liquidity. But one thing is that it is very sensitive to it, because Bitcoin is a 24/7 trading market. It's a global, worldwide market, right? And there's a lot of information parity. It never closes on weekends and all this other stuff, right? And we've had some global liquidity events. Of course, the Fed and other places have been lowering interest rates and contributing to increased global liquidity, albeit at like a smaller rate than previously, because they're trying to be a little bit more cautious, I think, right now. And that includes the Bank of Canada and other central banks like that. But we also had a really big liquidity event, which is the Japanese yen carry trade, which enables a lot of, and just for your viewers, the short of it is that a source of a lot of liquidity and money and funding for US equity markets comes from funds borrowing money in Japanese yen, because Japanese yen has a very, very low interest rate, and Japanese debt has a very low yield. However, that's been changing because Japan has just decided they are going to create a whole bunch of debt. So that's an example of Bitcoin being responsive to something. There's also, I think, at this current period, a little bit of an overhang. I don't know, Kurtis, maybe you can also chime in on this too. There's been a little bit of an overhang. Yeah, like you're kind of seeing the M2 global supply. So as you can kind of see, like, we definitely had like larger, especially during COVID, right? Like COVID was when like the Kraken was unleashed. And I think we're at kind of like the tail end of like, there was a tightening that came because of the 2022 inflation. And then we're kind of approaching this window where central banks are still loosening, but trying to be a little bit cautious, right? So I think that's kind of like represented here. You can kind of see that the line is going up, but it's starting to taper a little bit, right? Like basically, especially in the last kind of few months. And so there's that factor, and then there's a pretty specific factor, which is that I think a lot of the buyers of Bitcoin, notwithstanding what you're saying about states, Curtis, I think the long run picture is, and the thesis of it is that Bitcoin will stand above, and it will stand above many national currencies. That I strongly believe in, and some of the stuff with countries realizing that it's the best way to monetize their energy, like Bhutan or El Salvador realizing that it makes sense to be the first Bitcoin nation. You're going to see more of that, I think. But when we're speaking about now, most of the net new buyers are actually corporations, and namely these companies called Bitcoin treasury companies. And I think one issue that's been creating an overhang of sorts is there's a little bit of uncertainty about those companies specifically. There might be a little bit of a bubble, like they might have been financed worth more than the underlying Bitcoin that they hold, because these are companies that literally just hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet. They don't do much else, right? So there's some of that overhang, and I think there's some potential policy uncertainty over how the largest company's strategy will be treated in terms of whether it's listed on certain indexes or not, because of kind of where things are headed in terms of the regulatory definition of what they're doing. So the short of it is, like, I think regulators and others are going to probably churn against companies that are buying Bitcoin and solely buying Bitcoin. Like, their company only exists to hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet, right? Like, I think that regulators are going to start tightening that up, and that includes like industry regulators and industry associations first, and then maybe formal regulators, especially if there's a blow up. We saw, for example, there's several kind of these reverse IPOs with these Bitcoin treasury companies where they're worth much less now, right? Yeah, so Kurt's curious to hear kind of like your thoughts on that as well, and then I guess we can talk about surveillance states.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess in the interest of time, we don't have too much remaining, so maybe we'll hop over to
surveillance states. Let's
yeah.
All right. Yeah, sure. So yeah, let's talk about surveillance states a little bit, primarily the expansion of them. Yeah, whoever wants to kick it off first, we can start with, well, China or US. I know, Roger, you said you can talk about both. So we know about, the kind of state of surveillance states in the sense that it's been growing, a lot of cameras around these days, not just like ATM cameras or basic security cameras. You got cameras all over the place. Everyone's got a phone in their hand. Everyone's got devices, multiple devices that I'm sure are being tracked in some way. Yeah, and I could just imagine that it's even crazier in China. I could be wrong, but I mean that's the big assumption, right? So maybe we can start with a kind of a comparison and contrast of the two.
Yeah, Curtis, do you want to go first, and then I'll fill in?
Well, I mean, if there's anyone that thinks about privacy a lot, it's definitely Roger, despite his face and his name being here blasted to the internet. I know, Roger, you have Faraday bags for your phones, and you have
You're just doxing.
Oh, bro.
He's probably better to speak on this, but I mean, I will say that, like, everything that we do online, whether it's like, I think companies like ChatGPT or OpenAI, they know how you think, right? Like, they have access into your mind, and when you know how someone thinks, if you have a mind reader on folks, then that is a very easy way to be able to control them, because you can start telling them maybe not necessarily what to think, but you can influence them, because kind of what are the things that they care about, and kind of what are the soft spots to push on us emotionally. And I think this is a very interesting world that we're moving into right now, where we sometimes I question how much of my thoughts really are my own, or it's something that has been implanted there by either a company or a government.
Absolutely, Curtis. I totally
yeah, and
yeah.
and it's crazy, like like a lot of the, even some of the conversations that we have today, right? Like, it's like, how many of these thoughts are my own? Because thinking's not easy, right? Like, having your own opinion on something and spending the time to actually kind of walk the dog, if you will, on,
Yeah, you have
if
to
this
do that
happened,
to have
then
your own opinion, right?
totally, yeah. So, and the information that we get as well, how much of that is also legitimate, is how much of the reporting is strong, and how much of that is being put out by nation states to be able to swing a public narrative, like we were talking about, propaganda being fed to YouTube channels in Hong Kong and Taiwan. So yeah, it's a scary world. I think that China in particular, I think that COVID was a really great testing ground for how much control could they put on their populace, to be able to, under the justification of being able to prevent, a virus from spreading. How much it kind of gave states like a free pass in order to be able to track all of our movements, enforce things like lockdowns and vaccine passports, whatever it might be. And I know that there was a lot of interesting stories in China about how, if someone was detected with COVID, then they can lock down an entire apartment building and just kind of weld the doors shut and deliver them food and whatever services that they need, and fly drones outside of apartment windows to collect COVID tests. So they definitely have a stronger hold on their populace over there. But I also think that they have a much better understanding of how far they can push people before people get too sick of it and start revolting and protesting as well. So I think that that's part of yeah, it's unfortunate that just the timing of COVID, while we start having the technologies to be able to track and understand kind of what people are thinking. It's kind of all coming together at a bit of a flashing point throughout history. But yeah, Roger, I'll let you take it from here, man.
Take it away, Roger.
Well, I think first I want to start with the U.S. and China. They're two different surveillance states that are kind of co-evolving now, and that's the kind of interesting thing that people might miss. I'm not saying one is better or worse than the other. I'm saying they're different and they're learning from each other. I think that a lot of people, when they think of dystopia, they think of 1984, they think of Orwell, they think of cameras being shoved in your face. But actually, I think the scarier vision is Brave New World, where it's like, in your hedonistic pleasure, you are willingly giving yourself to the state apparatus. And I think that the way the internet is evolving is more like Brave New World, and that the United States is learning from China. So TikTok, for example, which has taken over the entire worldview of, I think, certain younger Americans, is very much a battle-tested thing in China. It's owned, well, was owned by ByteDance, and now they have, they might sell it to US companies, including Oracle. But the idea is, like, this is very much an evolution of something that comes from the Chinese state. The Chinese internet is censored and controlled, but not in the way that you would think. It's less so like you are doing bad. You mentioned Tiananmen. It's more that you're distracted by so many mindless things, and you're just buying so much stuff. And it's so convenient. It shows up your door like right away. So that helps with the state's economy. That helps with the state understanding who you are. That helps with surveillance. And I think that you're going to see that more and more, that model come into the United States as well. We talked about physical cameras. So I had a little bit of an internet tiff, not really, because he didn't really reply to me, but like Gary Tan, who founded Y Combinator, he had this really funny statement where he was like, Chinese surveillance is bad. When American surveillance is done, it helps prevent crime. And it's like, what? Like, how do you go and say that? And just to give like a really specific example of some of the convergence of what we're seeing, because I think at the end of the day, states want to create that kind of security layer. And the United States has actually been used to a position where they own not only financial data and privacy data on their own citizens, but also people around the world. Because a lot of the internet cables, a lot of the banking system passes through US regulators or wires. For example, if you hold US dollars, which a lot of foreigners do, you have to deal with likely a US bank or a foreign bank that is a US correspondent bank. So your data is being fed into this system, regardless of whether or not you actually live in the United States. So when you have this system, you know, again, the Chinese system has its own intricacies, and I can give you all anecdotes. Like my family was there during COVID. Like there's a lot of really scary stories, and I am really concerned. For example, the like those people who protested and then they got their COVID apps turned red. That was totally a thing that happened. You know, people were definitely quarantined against, I would say, against their will mostly, right? And people would follow up, and the police would check in on you, and all this other stuff. Like there was a lot of pretty dystopian stuff that got unveiled. And I think if there's ever a war or anything like COVID or whatever, that all that technology is already ready, fit for purpose. And in some ways, some of it's being normalized. And to give you a really specific example of that, Jordan, because you had asked about cameras. So China, of course, has physical cameras and AI software to recognize people. There's some very dystopian things, like, for example, people jaywalking. It tells you this is your name, citizen. This is your, you know, everything. And so China has one CCTV camera for every 2 citizens. It has about, I think, 700, 800 million cameras. And if you go to Beijing and Tiananmen Square, it's kind of crazy just to see how many cameras there are. But speaking about Gary Tan and the United States, Gary Tan funded this company called Flock Safety. And Flock Safety works with US law enforcement in order to create cameras that can recognize people not only through facial recognition, but through everything, clothing, their gait, all kinds of things. So this technology, states are developing, you know, their own versions of it, and sometimes they're developing it together in some sense, right? That is all coming to roost. And I'm just going to end off, and maybe this is like a worrying / sobering thought. But I think it's going to, like what Kurtis said, it's going to get really quite bad. I'm still an optimist at heart, but these technologies are going to get more and more powerful. And one technology I worry a lot about existentially is if someone cracks brain computer interfacing like Neuralink, because we're at least used to having our thoughts be private, right?
Yeah.
But the moment that's the one thing the surveillance state can't get of us right now. They can infer what we're thinking, and maybe sometimes we go on a podcast and we yap, and that's, you know, that's what we think. But you know, the moment something like a Neuralink gets developed, I think that's like Pandora's box. You've opened
report, right?
yeah, yeah, and then your thoughts will be tapped, and the problem is like you won't be economically competitive in many careers unless you use this technology. It's like the same thing as like you can't really get a high-paying job now unless you're able to work with the computer, right? So you're dialed in, your data, you're doing all this stuff, and it's going to be like that. Like if you're not one of the people who's like connected to the matrix, I mean, are you going to be able to feed yourself? Like that's where you start getting into these like very big kind of conversations. And for me now, I'm like, if there's one message I'd have, it's just like understand the technologies you're using and where they're all leading up to, and be mindful and just be deliberate about your choices. That's actually what I would end off on.
Fair enough, man. Fair enough. Kurtis, do you have any closing remarks before we wrap it up?
Not so much. I mean, I worry about the same thing that Roger thinks about, with, you know, with Neuralink and whatnot, that it's, yeah, I will probably have to plug in myself because otherwise I won't be able to compete. And, yeah, and at that point, I don't know if there's going to be a version of that is going to allow for private brain computer interfaces. I don't really see how it's possible. I mean, hopefully, you know, because I think that these technologies are ultimately inevitable. That we're kind of androids at this point already, with phones in our pockets and all of the devices that we have available at our disposal. But this just takes it to the next level for sure.
Yeah. And yeah, that's Elon's company. And obviously it has like noble effects too. Like if you're handicapped or something, you can use your brain to control things. I think they had that example right there, right? Like the guy's playing chess even though he's paralyzed or something. Yeah, like no, not yeah, like that guy. Yeah, exactly.
Black Mirror, it's such a great show because they kind of look at things like this.
That's a good show, yeah, for this kind of thing. Like Roger was saying, know the technology and the potential consequences. Absolutely, Curtis. Yeah.
Yeah, and one great episode in the latest season kind of thinks about Neuralink, about it was able to heal someone, but ironically, the thing that they didn't necessarily do to the person was control them, but they would just show them advertisements in their thoughts, which I guess in a way is controlling. But maybe that's really how this all plays out. It's the corporations that maximize on this technology as much as possible.
Fair enough. Well, guys, this was awesome. I had a wonderful time. I wish we had more time. We'll definitely have to do this again sometime. But before we go, please let everyone know, where they can find you if you'd like, anything you'd like to promote. Curtis, why don't you go first, my friend?
Yeah, I mean, like I said at the beginning, my main thing is a coffee business. So please come to our cafe. Please, come grab a coffee with us. We are trying to serve coffee that changes what people think of coffee can be. And on screen, Jordan has a funky 4-pack sampler, which the 4 coffees are really interesting. One of them is a whiskey barrel-aged coffee bean. So we age the green coffee in bourbon barrels before roasting it, and it kind of gets these really nice oaky, whiskey types of notes to it. We've got a couple of co-ferments in there that we at Origin at the farm, when they're drying the beans, they put watermelons on top of the beans, and then during the fermentation process, the microbes kind of mix together, and it imparts these watermelon or orange essences on top of the coffee, which makes for some really interesting combinations. And coffee is kind of like, there's so much experimentation that can be done with it. And, it's a lot healthier to drink it black than to put sugar and syrups in it. And
I take it, man. Black. Give it to me. Keep it black. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're trying to really just challenge people's palates and show them how interesting it can be just on its own.
Cool. Roger, what do you
Yeah.
got?
I highly endorse Funk, not because I was paid to do so, but just because it's a cool space. Yeah, I guess for me, if you wanna follow my rantings and ravings off of audio and into written form, probably the easiest way to find me is my Forbes profile. If you just look up my name, Roger Huang, Huang, and then Forbes. That also has my Nostr profile. My X is not. I can't believe it's called X these days, but like at Roger H1991. So that's the real me. So if you ever want to see all my rantings and ravings, that's where that all is. And of course, the book is Would Mao Hold Bitcoin? So I sometimes am running around in different cities, and hopefully have the opportunity to be around. And I actually think, because Jordan, are you based in Vancouver?
No, I'm in Ontario. I'm in Thunder Bay, but
you're in Thunder Bay.
I'm gonna come to Vancouver one day and visit Curtis. So
yeah.
We got a copy of the book at Funk, and it's like there and thereabouts. So yeah, that's me. I mean, Jordan, this was amazing. Thanks for inviting us. It was so much fun. Yeah. Love to hear all the different thoughts, and yeah, if we had more time, I'd love to spend some more time on this kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, for sure. Thank you guys again for your time and all your knowledge. This was awesome. I enjoyed this, and I would love to have you guys back again. Thank you to everyone in the audience, all the listeners, watchers. Please subscribe to the Divulgence podcast. You can get us on YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Everyone enjoy the rest of your holidays. We are going to have a New Year's end of the year show on the 30th, and I'm bringing in a bunch of people. We're going to talk about some of the stuff that's happened in this year and some predictions for next year. So that'll be a lot of fun. But until then, everyone, you guys take care, stay safe, and keep it real, man.